welcome back to part 2 of the paper mache skull and books tutorial. In that last segment we created our books out of corrugated cardboard, using some hot glue, masking tape, that sort of thing. And then we also used a very simple plastic skull as our mold to create our paper mache skull. So in this part, segment 2 here, we're going to release our paper mache from this skull and begin adding on a thin layer of clay to one section of our books and the bottom part of our skull here. So that's coming up right now. Alright, before we get started, let's go over some tools and materials that you're going to need for this first part of the segment here. Obviously, you're going to need your skull that you have paper mached over on that plastic skull. You're also going to need a blade of some sort. I'm going to use this box cutter here. An X-Acto knife will work really well for cutting into this. You'll need a marker to mark where you're going to cut. You're going to need a cardboard tube. I happen to have on hand a very sturdy cardboard tube that came out of a like an aluminum foil, roll of aluminum foil or saran wrap, something like that. And it happens to be just the right size for my candlestick, to insert my candlestick inside the skull. You're going to need a hot glue gun and some hot glue sticks for sure, and then you're going to need some crumbled up newspaper. As you can see, I have this other skull here. This is made out of some sort of like a, I don't know, ceramic or acrylic or something like that. I don't use this as a mold. I use it as a reference because I think it's it's about the same size of the skulls that I normally create to start off with. And it has quite a bit of detail, even in the back, in the front of it, the eyes, the teeth, the jaw. So if you have another skull, and it doesn't really have to be the exact same size that of the skull that you're creating, but if you do have a skull that has a lot of fine detail in it, like this one is missing a couple of teeth here and there, go ahead and get that out, and always have that in front of you during this tutorial when you're working on your skull. It's going to come in handy with the sculpting process, and basically just where to build up with your clay on the cheekbone areas, where the teeth are going to be in conjunction to the nose and then the lower jaw. So that's what I always do. I always have a reference here. So I'm going to set that over there. And the first thing that you're probably going to want to do is, make the decision. Are you going to have your skull here a full skull with the top and the bottom teeth? Or are you going to do what I did here and cut off that bottom jaw and just have them sitting on there and just have the top teeth or the top portion of the jaw? So for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and show you exactly what I did to create this one. Now, of course, if you're not going to cut off that bottom jaw, if you want the whole skull, then you're going to leave that on. But one of the first things that I do is I'm looking at my my other skull reference here, and I know that here's the nose, pretty much here's the nose cavity. So I'm kind of just marking that in. Doesn't have to be precise, doesn't have to be pretty, but that's pretty much where the nose cavity is. You come into this area, and the teeth don't just hang right off of the nose area. There's some bony structure in there. So I'm just kind of making my marks. And then from right there, that's basically where the top teeth would be, or would start. So I'm looking at that. That's where my teeth would be. So let's say I'm going to give my teeth about that much room here. So I'm just kind of drawing that in. Now, again, you would skip this part of drawing all of that in if you're gonna have a full skull here and not cut off the jaw. I just so happen to have the portion of the jaw for the paper mache that I cut off for this guy back here. So I can also use that as a reference. So I'm using that as a reference point for this guy that I did back here. Kind of do it the same exact way. So I've drawn that. That's where I'm going to cut, basically right around that line. And I'm going to mark it all the way across the bottom here. So this whole section, I'm going to remove that section here. The other thing that I'm going to do is with this skull, I'm going to, basically from the middle part, I'm just basically drawing a line right through the middle of the skull. Does not have to be exact. So that's my middle portion right here. So I drew that line. What I'm going to do now, and this has been allowed to dry, guys, for approximately 24 hours. I did notice that I do have a little bit of a wet spot right there. Normally I would stop and let it continue to dry, but for the purpose of this tutorial, and it's only that wet spot, and strangely enough, I could tell that that's the spot on the skull, on the plastic mold skull that had the hole in it where it connected to that skeleton. So I'm not going to worry so much about that, but if you have any wet points in your form, do not cut it off. Don't attempt to cut it off. Let it dry, and so that it's dried completely. So what I'm going to start to do as best I can and show you is I'm going to just start gently going right through the middle here. I'm not so much going to cut through the bottom portion of the jaw that I'm going to eventually cut off anyway, but I'm just going to cut through that line gently, a little bit at a time. Be very careful. The blade can slip, it can slide, and generally I would not be cutting it this way. I would either be standing up in a different position but I'm trying to show you the best that I can on how I'm going to remove this skull here. I'm going to come down here. That's that jawline that I'm going to remove. I'm going to come over in this direction. I basically made my cuts. They're not very deep. They're not enough in a lot of areas that I probably did not cut all the way through. So I'm going to continue to just gently, little bits at a time, press in just a little deeper and go over those lines again to cut through that. Alright, I think I might have cut into enough of it. Now what I'm using, this is a little small flathead screwdriver. Anything flat like this is going to help you gently pry away the paper mache from the skull. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do now. And you're going to need to do little bits at a time. Gently raise. Don't tear into it. If you do end up tearing into it a bit, don't panic. It'll be fine. See, I just did that. I just kind of accidentally right there, I tore into it a little bit too much. Not a big deal. And I'm just gently prying And I did it again where that split. It's okay, not a big deal. Takes some patience, but you just gotta gently work at it to kind of pry it off. And believe me, if we had not put in that water barrier layer with just the wet newspaper strips in the water prior to putting on the strips with the paste, it would have been much harder because I've tried it. This is very delicate again. See how delicate that is? It just wants to crumble. That's because that was still wet in that area. That's why I caution you, if you start doing this and you have wet spots, stop and let it continue to dry until it is completely dry. Now remember, from here up, that's what I'm going to use. This part I don't need to sculpt on, but I am still going to use a part of that. Alright, I've done enough prying. You see it's starting to come free now. I did a lot more prying off camera, so after about 5 minutes I'm able to lift that lower jaw free. Don't discard it. Notice how I have this, but it doesn't look like this because we're actually going to use this bottom piece. So don't discard that. Going back to this guy, I don't know, let's see. Oh, yeah, looks like I did enough prying, slowly prying. Alright, there's one half. And there's the other half. Alright, so we have our two halves. And what we're going to do at this point is make them whole again. We're going to go ahead and glue these things back together. I just squirt some glue right over the top. Be careful. Don't get your hands into the mix. This is the area where it was not completely dry, but I went ahead and, for the purpose of this tutorial, cut through it anyway. That's okay. We're going to end up claying all of this over anyway. Alright, so I have my skull glued back together, except for this opening down here, which we will seal up. But the next step is to create our opening at the top where we're going to insert the candle or the candlestick. I am going to use the candlestick again. Or if you're going to use your tea light, something such as this, you can use either a toilet paper cardboard tube or a paper towel cardboard tube, and they're just about the same diameter, and it's pretty much a perfect fit, leaving you just a little bit more room. So if you're using a larger candle like this, this is going to work great for you. I'm going to use another candlestick like I did with my previous one. And this candlestick, again, fits pretty much perfectly in there with some room to spare. So with your marker, you're going to line up, and this time I'm going to try to get it dead center in the middle and not have it off kilter. So you'll just line up where you want to put your candlestick in the middle of the skull, and just make that mark around there. Now keep in mind, when you're making your mark, your circle mark around there, that mark is going to be wider than your actual cardboard tube. So when you go to cut this out, which is what I'm going to do next, make sure that you're cutting inside of that mark and not at that mark or beyond that mark, because you don't want it to be too wide. We want it to be a little snug with some room, but we don't want it to be so big that it just falls completely through. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out now. That's cut out. Now obviously you may have to work at it a little bit because of the hot glue. Not a big deal. You can see how I went inside my mark here. Just so I know I have enough room where it's going to be snug enough to push in there. And as you can see, it fits right in there, just like that. Now I've pressed this all the way down to where it's gone all the way through the bottom of the skull and it hits my table surface. So I know right there, that's pretty much where I want to connect this particular piece right here. The other thing that you're going to need to do, because you want to have enough length inside there so that your candle fits in there, but you see how I have too much length in there? So my candle will just drop all the way through. We don't want that. Basically what I want to do is I'm going to hold this up and determine how much of my candlestick I want to be showing. I think I want probably about that much to be showing. So I'm going to make a mark there, right across there. Got my mark there, and that's where I'm going to cut this tube. So this is the portion of where I want, or how much I want my candlestick to be sticking out, and there's the bottom of it. We need to seal off this bottom, obviously, so the candlestick doesn't fall completely through. So using a little piece of corrugated cardboard, I'm just going to put my cardboard tube on there and draw around it. And I'm going to go ahead and cut this out. It's going to be a lot easier to cut this out using a pair of scissors. And again, I'm going to cut inside that circle. So I have my little cardboard cutout, and I'm going to go ahead and glue that piece onto one end. And to ensure that that's not going to go anywhere, I'm going to glue around that piece. Okay, and then I'm going to let that cool, and then I'm going to be able to insert this and glue it into place inside my skull. Alright, moving right along. This is cooled, it's ready to go. It's a lot easier after you've glued that piece on. It's a lot easier to go from the inside of your skull to insert your tube. So just about like right there. You want to leave a little bit of room at the top where it's showing, because keep in mind we're gluing this in place, but we're also going to be claying it in place. The glue is just the temporary hold at this point. So leave a little bit hanging out, like so, and then go ahead and glue. Use your hot glue gun, and glue that in place. Before this glue around this cardboard tube up here has cooled and set completely, put your candlestick in your tube to make sure that you have the amount of candle sticking out of the skull that you want, because once that's glued and set into place, it's going to be difficult to remove that to make any kind of adjustments. So that's about where I want that one. Just a bit more of it sticking out. If I wanted more of it, like say this high, then I would remove this tube at this point and cut more of it off and then reinsert it and glue it into place. But I think this is good right here. I kind of like that. It does look to be a little bit more centered than what I had the other one. This one's going to be sunk into the skull a little bit deeper than my my other Skull and Books sculpture, but that's okay because I'll have two different ones with two different sizes of candlesticks in there. So make your adjustments now. Any adjustments that you feel you need to make them now. Alright, next thing we want to do here, because we again, just like with our books, we had that hollow void. We have a hollow void in our skull here. So I'm going to go ahead and use the same technique with some newspaper. I'm just going to crumble up some newspaper and pack it in around the cardboard tube that's inserted in there. I'm going to get as much newspaper in here as possible because I don't want this to be a hollow skull. This is again going to add more structure. It's going to add more support so that we can apply our clay on there and not have to worry so much about it collapsing in on itself. And obviously make sure your glue has set around your cardboard tube that you inserted before you start doing this so that you don't accidentally displace that. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this entire thing with as much crumbled up newspaper as I possibly can to make sure that it's going to be a more solid structure instead of just this hollow skull. Alright, I've got that pretty well packed in there to where I feel that's going to add more support to this. Now it's time to seal up the bottom of this, and I'm going to use this. Basically what I'm going to do is trim around so that I just have that flat piece. So I'm cutting off the side pieces basically. Okay, so I trimmed all of that off there. Now I just have this bottom piece, and what I'm going to do is simply glue that right back into place. So it'll sit like this, and that will give me enough area here to insert teeth. We'll get to that point later on probably in another segment, not in this segment, but I have enough room here for some top teeth. So it'll sit like a skull that does not have the bottom jaw. Alright, I've glued that into place. Now, if you see that you have any kind of gaps or it's not sitting completely flat, not to worry, because keep in mind we are going to be claying, putting a layer of clay over this, and if there are any uneven areas where it doesn't sit flat, trust me, it will, and it will sit flat on top of your top book. So don't stress about that whatsoever. Alright, well that concludes segment 2 of our paper mache skull and books sculpture tutorial. I showed you how to remove that paper mache mold from a plastic skull and how to insert a cardboard tube so that you could have a platform or an opening, a more secure opening for your candlestick. Next segment coming up, we're going to get sculpting. That's the fun part. So I'm excited about that. As always, I thank you for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.